Welcome back, and we're very excited about this next panel. Collaborative efforts between farmers, researchers, innovators, capital providers, and agricultural organizations may be the key to removing obstacles to the adoption of digital ag on small and mid-sized farms. Things such as cost, complexity, too large scale, and limited ability. So I'm very pleased to introduce our next panel, and it's led by Hadas Kress-Gazit to consider the barriers and benefits of robotics, AI, and autonomy for farms throughout the Northeast. Let's give them a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. My name is Hadas Kress-Gazit. I'm a professor in mechanical and aerospace engineering at Cornell. My research area is robotics, and I'm going to be moderating this panel. So we're going to start with some introductions. So I'm going to start with Jenny.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Jenny Lemieux. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Vivid Machines, and we were lucky enough to be a Grow New York winner last year, so really excited to be back here. Our company works primarily with fruit growers, apple growers in New York, helping them understand information about the fruit on their trees using a computer vision system that we've developed, and then taking that data and passing it downstream to marketers, even insurers, to help with some of the other tasks that we need to do when producing fruit.
Chris?
I'm Chris Laughton. I'm with Farm Credit East. Farm Credit East is a farmer-owned financial services cooperative. So we finance agriculture, and we also provide financial services like tax prep, payroll, consulting, et cetera, to New England, New York, and New Jersey. My role there is to run our customer education and outreach programs. And I do a lot of speaking at events such as this, as well as conduct outreach to the diverse farm community of the Northeast.
Excellent. And online, somewhere in the world, is Vasanth. Please.
Yes. Well, apologies for not being there in person. I'm a bit under the weather, but I thought since it's a digital ag panel, you needed to have someone who is digitally kind of streaming in over here. I'm a partner with Mckinsey and Company. I lead a lot of our work around agriculture and technology. I also lead our global farmer survey, where we survey farmers across the globe around the adoption of new technologies and farming practices. Excited to and looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent, thank you. So this panel is actually following the previous panel. There's some kind of interesting themes that are going to show up again. For example, the notion of AI, and maybe a little bit broader than that. Adoption of tech, cost, and barriers, if you will, for digital ag. This specific panel is going to focus more on digital ag from the context of sensors, robots, autonomy, data, less from the perspective of apps that could be helpful, which is also within the space of digital. So that's kind of that's the lens we're going to have during this talk. And I was really excited about the panelists specifically because, well, first of all, amazing, but also they bring in very different perspectives. So from the really working with the grower to more regional to more global view. So we're going to kind of touch on those things as well. So we're going to start out with maybe a few success stories. So where has digital ag really shown promise and actual things that are happening? So we'll start with Jenny.
Yeah, and I'll talk a bit about kind of what we see. So we're working with apple growers, so pretty specific. And it's been really incredible. We've been around 2.5 years, almost 3 years now, but incredible to see the amount of adoption from growers, especially here in New York, testing out new technologies. And this year, not only did we have growers using our system themselves, using this computer vision system to understand everything on their farm, but they're testing out automated sprayers, interesting AI-driven irrigation tools. There's so much technology, and I have to give kudos to the growers because they're ahead of us in some ways. They're thinking about it also from the perspective of how do they need to change the structure of their farms to make them conducive to using these technologies, really, really forward thinking when you think about trees that grow for 20 years. And so, just seeing, I think it's more the onus on the technology side is finally coming along to the point where it is usable, not just in prototype stage, but commercially by growers. And this summer we're seeing wide adoption of all sorts of different stuff, and it's starting to make an impact on farms.
Chris?
Sure. So agriculture, if we take a big step back and look at agriculture over time, we think about sometimes agriculture as being a bit of a laggard and compared to other industries in terms of its rate of adoption of technology. But really, agriculture has been always shaped by and adopting new technologies. Whether if we go all the way back to like the cotton gin, revolutionized cotton growing. The invention of the steel plow was a new technology at the time that transformed agriculture. And fast forward to today, we're seeing, what's cutting edge today becomes mainstream tomorrow. And I think that farmers are not necessarily averse to new technology. What they're averse to is risk and the economics of new technologies. So in our production system that we have today, the farmer really has to shoulder the burden of risk more than probably any other player in the supply chain. And so as a result of that, the first thing that a farmer is thinking about is risk adoption, and then the second part is economics and will it pay off. But as the technology improves and becomes more mainstream, we're seeing things like dairy becoming a leader in technology adoption, and robotic milkers on dairy is no longer particularly cutting edge even. It's becoming mainstream and widely adopted. We're seeing AI technology looking at herd health and cow activity and keeping milk supply safe and that sort of thing. So I think that we're seeing a lot of technologies rapidly being adopted in the agriculture space.
Thanks. Vasanth?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've spent some time in other industries when it comes to technology adoption, and agriculture is definitely, I think, leaned forward in many different ways, especially some of the use cases that, Chris just mentioned. When I think of success stories, the one that comes to mind is farm management systems, right? So in our survey, we asked the question of, how much do you adopt today, or you're going to be adopting in the next couple of years? And I think at least in North America, about 60% of farmers said they've adopted some form of a farm management system, which is a software that they're using to run their operations in some meaningful way. It's very much lower in other geographies globally, but at least in North America, it's north of 60%. And it also varies by small farmer versus mid-size versus large. I mean, we're here to speak about small and mid-size. We see a lot more adoption of technology by large farmers than small and mid-size because of some of the examples that both Jenny and Chris shared, which is around the ROI of these technologies is not super clear. But there are some clear learnings from these, at least farm management system adoption that we can then apply to, farm automation or robotics or the new generation of technology that's rolling in.
Excellent. So speaking of these success stories, what do you think they imply for future opportunities and future success stories?
Yeah, so speaking to some of the points that have already been made, I think one of the things is dealing with risk. How do we involve the rest of the supply chain in risk? So the farmers are accepting a lot of the risk, testing these new technologies on farm. Are there ways of involving the marketers, the shippers, the insurers, and the technology companies in sharing some of those risks? Also, there's a lot of new technologies sprouting up, but kind of to the farm management system point, not all these technologies are talking to each other. Actually, right now, I would say most of them aren't talking to each other. So, it makes it really challenging for a grower or farmer because they're adopting all these different systems that have no connection. So, integrating, building connections across these systems and sort of providing an end-to-end platform, I think, is a massive opportunity for the growers, just to make life a little bit simpler.
I would definitely agree with what you just said in terms of the integration. I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of sort of fragmented incremental improvements that are happening out there, where there might be a robotic harvester or a drone that's doing visual imaging of crops or something like that, but they're not yet to the point where they're integrated into a whole farm management system. And I think that's kind of the next frontier that we're going to see. taking over in terms of technology, but I think the first thing that farmers are thinking about with any kind of new technology is it going to work reliably? Can I economically adopt it? And then what's the learning curve going to be for me? Because farmers have a lot to think about in terms of the, growing their crops, harvesting, managing employees, everything else. So if it's a steep learning curve or a really complex technology, that's another barrier to adoption. But if those three things can be dealt with, then I think the technology will be adopted and will become more mainstream.
I might just add, I think there are many things we need to get right, but I think the two things that consistently keeps coming up. One is around business model innovation, right? Which is, who are you solving the problem for, and who cares about the problem the most to pay for it? And a lot of times it might not be the farmer itself, right? There might be someone else who is willing to pay more for that versus the farmer itself. So for example, in the previous panel around the whole area around being able to adopt sustainable farming practices, there's a lot of benefit for commercializing those crops more collective with the consumer with a higher premium. How do we shift that value pool to the farmer? So I do think there's a need for more business model innovation versus expecting the farmer to pay more than what they spend today on technologies. I think that's one. The second is, how do we go from using manual services to using technology to assist us as humans in a more effective way when it comes to doing our job? Like, can we do more with less? And how can we use technology to do that? So it's like tech enabling existing things that are happening rather than trying to create something completely new. Because I do think the one thing that's a bit frustrating in agriculture is the seasonality, right? It does take time to innovate. You can't, as much as we all want to make and break things in innovation communities, I think you only have a window to test it depending on which crop, which region, et cetera. So I think getting those two things right, I think is critical as we think of scaling more technologies with the farmer, right?
Excellent. So we were talking about successes, but we also talked a little bit about barriers. So we talked about risk, you talk about integration, and let me actually start with Vasanth. You mentioned that you see 60% adoption of these farm management systems. And Chris, you said that the integration of these new technologies, this autonomy or physical systems, integration with the farm management system is tricky, right? So I was wondering whether you can all comment, and I'll start with Vasanth, in terms of if you can elaborate on those challenges and also what opportunities come, because there's a room of innovators here, so that would be nice.
Yeah. It's a good question. I think, every time we do farmer research, the problem, the one thing that also shows up is hey, there's 10, 15 point solutions today that the farmer is using and they don't talk to each other. So the ideal solution is something that connects everything, right? And then someone will create that, and then you have to create one more system to connect that system to the other 15. So I think there's a little bit of that vicious circle you keep going in. So, when I think about what are some solutions or how to think about it as a community of innovators, I think one is around interoperability of data between different systems and different devices. And, other industries have done it, like creating a more open ecosystem of sharing, at least when it comes to critical data points. And that's only possible if value is shared in a more equitable way, which doesn't happen as much in this industry as well. So I do think it's a big problem that we need to tackle as a community. I think the second piece is around when we build solutions, making sure that we are using existing data that exists in the network rather than recreating that same data is also something we should keep in mind. Now, I think if you ask people who are actually building solutions, it's easy for me to say this, but when you're building solutions, if you're going to use someone else's data, then what value are you really adding to the grower, right? I think how are you bringing value it raises the bar quite a bit. So I do think, moving our innovation to intelligence and moving it to, spending more time on how do we help the farmer directly in their end use cases versus spending all the time in data integration is an effective way of doing it. But it is a tough problem. I was on a panel at the robotics conference, and we had one of the farmers, Larry, and he mentioned he maintains his own data warehouses because he got so tired of all these solution providers coming in and telling him how to maintain his data. I don't think all farmers are going to go do that, but I do think it's something that we need to tackle in some form, because otherwise we're going to have 10 versions of the same field, right, in the community.
Yeah, Chris?
Another sort of obstacle to adoption, because this panel, our focus is on smaller and mid-sized farms. One challenge that we have, particularly in New York, is that a lot of automation revolves around taking a task and automating that thing. And that could be an intellectual task, such as diagnosing a plant disease, or it could be a physical task like picking an apple. And one of the challenges that we have with a lot of farmers in the Northeast is that they don't have enough of any one thing. A vegetable grower, for example, could have 30 varieties of vegetables growing in a single field, each with their own cultural and harvesting issues. But there is definitely a trickle-down effect over time as technology matures and becomes more cost-effective. And we're seeing that already in that smaller farmers can use an app on their phone and take a picture of a blighted leaf and then determine what the disease is that's affecting their plants, and then what course of action to take on it. And that's already becoming established and cost-effective and mainstream. And I think we're going to see the same thing with like robotic technology and other technologies as they mature and become more accessible.
Jenny?
Well, I'm going to talk about it from the standpoint of a technology producer. And the reality is that building things for farms is really difficult. Often, it's outdoor, you're dealing with weather and lighting and wear and tear. And so it takes way longer than you think it will to develop something that works. And on top of it, we're talking about adoption on farm. It has to be supportable, it has to be stable, it has to be easy to use. So trying to build that is very complicated. So often, technology producers like us, you focus on one problem first, and you see if, can we solve X? And if that works, then you have this vision to solve the whole universe, but just solving X is really complicated. And then, on data sets, like when we think of, we're in the world of permanent and specialty crops. So there really aren't data sets out there. There are no large enough data sets to use, for example, in computer vision and AI, if we wanted to do something like, let's go figure out fire blight in apples, which is something that we're really interested in doing. So, you take a year to collect the data, and then you've got, researchers and engineers trying to figure out the algorithms, and then you actually have to make it work on the farm. And I think that, that's a huge barrier when you think about how long things take, the patience that you have to work with, your farmers who are partners, managing expectations. And then you have to find the money to have the time to build all of this. And I think of companies like Abundant Robotics that were doing apple picking robotics, and all of the growers were super excited about it. But they weren't able to find the funding to continue their journey, so they just couldn't quite get there. And I think that's one of the big challenges is, how do we fund the journey of these complex solutions to complex environments, and then, build and manage expectations along the way, and then worry about integration, et cetera. Or maybe, there's some other collaborations that could happen earlier. But farms are really, I've worked in, automotive and banking, and they're much easier problems. Like, it's way more controlled than you see in agriculture. So it's really exciting because it's really challenging, but it's hard, yeah. That's what I say.
Yeah, so you gave an excellent example of, robot picking fruit and not being able to fund that. So if I was to give you, I don't know, very large sum of money, I don't know what you guys mean by large sum of money, what would you do with that now?
What we would love to do is do really, really well in apples, for example, and then reproduce that so that it's accessible across all fruit and vegetables. Our vision is to build a massive data set across all specialty and permanent crops that could be used not only by growers, but by researchers to develop new varietals or to test out, it could be new applications and inputs. It could be used by insurance company to better understand the industry. So we really have this vision of building that data set that doesn't exist, back to Vasanth's point, to really help agriculture, at least in the permanent specialty crop side. There's opportunities along the whole supply chain to become more efficient so that we can produce more quality fruit on existing acreage. And that's really what we would like to develop.
When you say data set, what data do you mean? What is the information that you
like
want?
pictures of, so a really simple example is in apples. If you go visit an apple orchard, you might see trees that are tall and skinny, and trees that are big and round, and trees that look like V's, and other ones that look like Y's. And so, there's so many, let alone the different fruit varieties. So when you think about things like computer vision, which is what we're working in, you're essentially training the computer like a child, like this is a tree. And then you show it a tree that looks like a V, and it's like, that's not a tree. And so you have to show it a lot of different versions of trees so that it can understand and then begin to count trees or detect certain things to do with those trees. So that's a really simple example of just going out and collecting lots of images of different types of trees and orchards so that then you can build solutions for those trees.
Cool.
Yeah.
One comment that I would like to make, which I think Dr. Holton from the previous panel would probably appreciate, is the importance of public funding for agricultural research. I think that that's an area where, as a country, the United States has been lagging, and I think it's, events like, or programs like Grow New York, like Cornell, the land grant system, that sort of thing, really do a remarkable job in innovating and creating new technologies that can be then widely adopted by farmers. Agriculture is very dispersed as an industry sector compared to, like, say, if we look at like automobiles, there's probably less than 10 automobile manufacturers in the world that make 99% of the automobiles out there. Whereas farmers, we have 30,000 farmers in New York alone. And so they tend to be very dispersed and very small. And a farm, even a large one, has a very limited capacity to do research and development on their own. And so I think that that demonstrates the importance of that public support for agricultural research, because it really is it's not only is it a wide-scale benefit in the agricultural community, but to society in general. And so I think that that's an area that we really need to do more in. There is public support for agricultural research, but it's lagged over time, and it really hasn't increased at the rate that it should, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think Ben talked about the Engines program from NSF that I'm also part of that, and we're really looking at those questions, both from kind of, they're really pushing, I don't know if you mentioned that, the use-inspired research. I mean, research that actually benefits the current problems as opposed to the basic research that academics love to do, right? So we enjoy that. Vasanth, from a global perspective, where do you see so we talked a little bit about the kind of the challenges of integration and the 15 systems that talk to another system and things like that. Where do you see the next high impact domains in the digital ag space? Because you mentioned there's already some adoption or quite a lot of adoption of farm management systems, which are really from the digital space.
Yeah. And also, I think to Chris's point, I just want to reinforce, I think the role of public funding, I think we looked at how much funding, for example, is going to farmers for adopting conservation practices, and I think there was close to north of $6 billion in the U.S., and it's a tiny fraction when you look at it in comparison to other funds, but it's still a meaningful amount that's going to farmers to adopt conservation practices, right? And also to Jenny's point, if we need to find a way to help the farmer invest in these technologies because it doesn't fit into the existing P&L and the value is not fully created and accrued by the farmer. And that inequity of value creation in that value chain is going to be a constant challenge for adoption of technology at scale. So as much as folks in the room to think about how do we innovate the business model, again, going back to the point, I think will play an important role. And also, interestingly enough, as we speak here, I heard there is a Senate hearing today about innovation in American agriculture using AI and technology right now going on with a bunch of senior leaders speaking to the Senate about it. So it is a top of mind topic. I think we need to continue, moving the community forward. Coming to your question, on the global scale, I think it depends on the geography, right? I think when you look at geographies more closer to Asia, or like I'll just pick specifically around India, like, there is a lot of smallholder farmers with the average farm size is like an acre, right? In the US, like you have 80% of the farmers with more than 2,000 acres of farmland or 500 acres of farmland. So it really depends on the geography. I do think like in places like India and like more smallholder farmers, there is a lot of adoption of digital tools for like engaging the farmer as a supplier directly. Like, I mean, it's amazing how much farmers use WhatsApp, right? In Brazil or in India. That's how they conduct business. That's how they pay their bills. That's how they do everything, right? But in the US, farmers love the human relationship, right? And they want that human relationship, and it's not fully digital. So I think number one depends on the geography. I think number two, areas where we are seeing a lot of opportunity, definitely from robotics and automation. I think we see opportunity just because the value creation is is easy to understand the ROI of investment in it. Like if you are going to be using labor today to remove weeds in high specialty crops, you're paying a certain amount of money, and it's hard to find labor, and a robot helps you solve the problem with assisted with the human, right? I don't think it's fully, everyone claims to be fully autonomous, but also I think human behavior changes a bit more slowly, but it does help, right? So I think that's one area. The second area that I'm excited about is around, technologies that are helping create more visibility into the supply chain itself from a traceability standpoint. So for the example, I do think it's easy to talk about at that level, but the execution has to happen at the crop and the region level. And that is a very hard problem. Like, how do you, make sure that we can bring more visibility into the quality of the crops, right? Like, I was reading, like, for every tomato we eat, we produce 2 tomatoes as a planet. Like, what happens to the other tomato, right? I mean, sure, consumers throw it away because we buy more than what we need to, but there is, again, more than 40-30% that still gets wasted in the supply chain due to distribution, due to packing, due to handling of harvest, due to yield estimation, et cetera, right? So I think that's an area that I'm personally excited about. And maybe the third area I would say is around, I think there's been a lot of investment in remote sensing and, being able to use imagery as a solution to be able to help better inform farm operations. I think we'll continue seeing more innovation in that space, not from a remote sense, like not to get farmers to buy more imagery, but for them to be able to close the loop on, actually do the work for them, like see and spray technologies to reduce the user material cost, but also better for the planet, but also better for the farmer. So you're using the insight to do something, right? So I think those would be probably the 3 big areas that I would be excited about in that order.
Excellent. Before we take questions from the audience, so we were talking about from the developer's perspective, from the innovators, from the technologists. Here are the things we can do. You're missing the data. How do you see the partnership with the farmers? Because I'm sure you have that. We just didn't talk about that. In terms of, I mean, the thing that caught me in what you're describing about data is that people go around. It doesn't need to be you, the person who goes and collects the data. You need to have some mechanism that engages with your partners to get that data, right? Because I think images, in my world, images is easy. Just get images, right? There are other things that are much harder data that's harder to get. So I'm wondering how do all 3 of you, and I'll start with you, maybe Jenny, the partnership with maybe people who are not currently participating in this kind of innovation ecosystem, or they have too many things on their mind to actually try to robot in the field. How do you see those partnerships in a way that would not cause a lot of extra work, that would actually work?
Yeah, I think that's the big question. I think one of the biggest questions is how do you make this easy enough for anyone to use? And it's really great to have organizations like Cornell's extension program. Like, I think there's a lot of partnership that can happen, from companies like ours, extension programs, what we see happening with the growers. So, I think of New York, of the Cornell Demo Day, for example. All of the growers attend, and there's demonstrations on technology, and some of the growers are already using the technologies, and there, we hear from the researchers feedback on our technologies and others in terms of what works, what doesn't, what still needs to be developed. And the entire community is participating in those conversations. Not only the growers that are actually currently using the technologies today. So I think there's those collaborations, and back to the public funding too, the collaborations across public and private sector is really important for disseminating knowledge and as well as dispersing some of the risk. And we feel really grateful being a company that is pretty early with the support that we receive kind of at all levels from growers who, last year might have said like, hey, this isn't working yet, but we really appreciate what you're doing and we'd love to continue working with you, to, groups like the Cornell Agritech team who are, collaborating on research and across the board. So I think there's a real push towards collaboration and moving these technologies forward together. Yeah, so.
One sort of innovative business model that helps overcome the gap of both the cost of the technology as well as the issue of scale for smaller and mid-sized farms is the idea that maybe the farmer doesn't need to own the technology. It can be provided as a service. And there's precedent for that if we think about like custom harvesters in agriculture. Like if we look at major row crops, like corn and wheat and soybeans, most farmers don't own their own combine. They hire someone to harvest for them, or a farmer might own one and then harvest for all their neighbors for a fee. And so a company, whether it's a custom operator or a technology provider themselves, could have the harvest technology, own it, and harvest a farmer's crop as a service, and do that on sort of an incremental basis, and then that helps overcome some of the obstacles that we talked about earlier.
I think I do think like being able to help create like lighthouse examples of how to create value and create a little bit of a blueprint for farmers, and to show them here is how you get to the R of the ROI, right? I mean, instead of just talking about, hey, you'll get a good ROI on this, it's 3 times the investment. Like, I find it difficult to, even I speak to a number of different startups and early stage companies in the ag tech space, and it takes a few rounds of conversations to get to the R and the ROI for the farmer. The problem is clear, but the return on investment for the farmer and that technology is not very clear. And if I can't understand it, I don't know how a farmer is going to be able to see that dollar actually flow through to the bottom line, right? And it can't be fuzzy numbers. And that's a bit of the challenge in the industry, right? I think you have to bring real dollars into the farmer's pockets in that year or the next year. And you have a limited window to do that. So I think collaborations that can help establish those blueprints, I think that would go a long way. And this can be, bigger companies who have access to the market and the farmer relationship, working with more innovative companies that are trying to solve a problem is one way to do it. And also having more, it's not just pilot something and let it go, but like really try to scale it across a good amount of acres. I think the second one is, I think to Chris's example, I think tech enabling existing services is a really good way to go about it as well. Where if you're an agronomy service provider today that's providing traditional services, how can you use technologies that are there to offer, do more with less, or be able to offer a new set of services that the farmers might be willing to pay for? And the third is, I think there are some farmers who are leaning into it, right? Even in our research, we found like 50% of farmers, I was surprised by it, who said, I think about 40 to 50% said they'd be willing to try new products if they are leading to higher yield in some farm, or helps with operational efficiency. It's an easy box to check in a survey, but at the same time, it shows that they're willing if the value is clear, right? So those would be maybe some areas in my mind for looking for further thoughtful, specific collaborations, not just if you're doing something together, right?
Excellent, thank you. I think we might have some questions from the audience.
Yes. So this is kind of a two-parter, so I'll start with the first part and let you guys discuss and then come back to the second part. The first one is, how does the incorporation of robotics and AI impact the human labor and employment on farms?
So who should we start with that? Chris, would you like to
I'll
start?
take a crack at it. I think that we often talk about robotics and AI as replacing farm labor, and it does to a certain extent. Dr. Holton previously mentioned that we used to have a majority of our population working in agriculture. Now we're down to 4%. A large reason for that is technology. We're not hand harvesting our crops, major crops anymore, and that makes the mechanization of that reduces the amount of labor needed. But I think on a typical farm, when we see at Farm Credit East a farm investing heavily in technology, they tend not to have fewer workers. What they tend to do is have those workers doing higher value tasks. So the workers might spend less time pulling weeds and more time doing something value added or higher value to the farm. So we're not seeing it really displace a lot of workers in terms of employment.
I'd say so far we've seen the same thing. It might be different in 5 to 10 years, but it seems to be more a matter of focus. So, instead of using the same techniques across the entire farm, how do you more precisely focus on areas that maybe need more love or have a larger opportunity, and then harvest that value essentially. So we're seeing that, and also the changing nature of work. So moving from the guys used to be out there with click counters counting the apples. Now they're it's like, okay, well, I've got to mount this thing on my tractor and drive it and control it. So it's a slightly different task, and change management, which I think Chris or Vasanth brought up, is part of what's happening. How do you manage that changing skill set on the farm without changing it too much too fast? Though in the future, there is a world where robotics, I think, will reduce labor needs, at least in permanent and specialty crops. But I think that's not a bad thing, because we're struggling to get labor for things like harvesting fruit. So yeah, it's interesting times.
Yeah. Vasanth, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I don't have anything much to add. I'll just add maybe an anecdotal example. I was talking to a farmer up in Pacific Northwest, and he was saying they didn't harvest a whole bunch of, a few acres because the labor cost was so expensive and it was so hard to find labor. It was better off to not harvest that at all. So I do think there's a little bit of, if we don't have people who want to actually do the job, and we are finding people who will drive the cost of food up, I don't see a different, I think this will help us in that kind of journey, right? Otherwise, we'll make food unaffordable, or we will continue to, waste food that we're growing because we don't have the labor to actually do it. So it feels like a problem that is getting more and more acute. Now, we've run the survey 5 years, and it seems to get more acute every year.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add from the robotics perspective, we get this question a lot on different panels and different situations. Are robots going to take our jobs? So what we're actually seeing, and I have some, I've seen a little more data also in the manufacturing space, is that it's basically what Jenny and Chris were talking about. It's changing the nature of jobs, but it's not necessarily reducing the number of jobs. And if you start introducing automation, start introducing robotics into different spaces, you need to introduce also people who know how to work with the robots and know how to fix them when they get stuck on something, because inevitably they will get stuck on something, and so on. So it changes the nature of the job. It makes jobs higher value. I think that would be the main thing that I would add. But this is beyond ag, right? This is in different spaces where robotics is starting to make headway.
Great, thank you so much. You guys actually covered the second part of that question with the first.
Which was what?
It was, how can this type of technology be integrated into current agricultural methods?
There we go.
So I think we have time for one more. And it is, how does customer education about digital ag tech play a role in the adoption of this technology?
Chris, would you like to take this?
Depends on how you define your customer. If you're talking about the consumer of food and agricultural products, I think it's interesting times. We've seen some technology has a consumer appeal. Others, technologies, consumers are somewhat averse to it. Others, they're sort of neutral on it. I think if we consider the customer as the farmer, their priority is clearly return investment, as we've discussed, managing risk and affordability. I don't know if you have any.
I
Want to expand on that?
I do actually. We are not educating, we are learning. We're learning about the farms. We're learning about what the technology needs really are. How can this stuff truly be adopted? And I feel like for us, it's more of an inbound process to be able to make our technology fit better to farms. So rather than trying to educate and change more on the grower side, it's how do we make our technology easier and more relevant to using on farms. So that's how we look at it.
Yeah. Vasanth?
Yeah, I don't know how many of you, the last time you downloaded an app, you went to the tutorial or the 101 to learn how to use it, right? You just download it and you pinch through it and you figure it out. And I think there's a little bit of, you got to get technology to that level. It's not like, farmers are not adopting technology. There's always this question around, hey, do we see more younger farmers adopting versus, the average age of a farmer in the US, I think right now is about 57, 58. Are we seeing a lower adoption? I think it is if it's easy to use, I think we're seeing adoption. Yes, it is more younger demographics are adopting more than the, elder demographic. But if you make it as easy and simple to use, then, which is always one of the top 3, by the way, challenges to adopt new technologies. So I do think you have to develop products that are easy to use. But also, I do think there's a little bit of, you're changing human behaviors that have been wired for many, many decades. And this industry is run on gut and intuition and pattern recognition that's been developed over decades by the community of folks that live, in that zip code or 2-3 zip codes from there. So how do you have them build trust in the technology and the insight that you're offering, while also rely on that network of people that they're with? I think is an interesting challenge for people building products in the space.
Excellent. So I think we have enough time just for a final thought from each one of you. So let me start with Jenny.
Oh.
I'll put you on the
I'm
spot.
not really sure what to say. No, this is a really interesting panel, and I loved the different perspectives, from global down to local and different facets. And I would say just, if parting words would be this all takes time, both on the sort of the behavior side as well as on the technology side. So, the more that we can understand that and work towards these longer term visions, the better off we'll be.
Chris?
I would just say that I think it's an exciting time to be involved in agriculture right now, and that the amount of enthusiasm and innovation is really contagious and remarkable. And just to repeat something I said earlier is, what's cutting edge today becomes mainstream tomorrow. We're seeing some robotic applications already becoming widely used in dairy and controlled environment agriculture, greenhouse vertical farming. They're already highly mechanized and becoming even more so all the time. And I think that this technology is going to continue to progress and evolve, and we're going to see much more of it over time. There will be some shakeouts. Not every new idea is going to pan out, but that's, I guess, part of the process of innovation, right? So I think it's an exciting time.
Okay, and Vasanth?
Yeah, I'm actually very excited. I do think, we as a planet have to produce more food for the growing population that is more sustainable than ever before. And I think being able to do that, we do need a lot of innovation in the agriculture space and food space. And I think technology is going to play a huge role in it. And I think we have so many building blocks from other industries that we can use. Now, the questions about how we put it together that works for this industry and what are some new areas that we need to be innovating in as a community, right? I'm also quite sad for not being there in person, but the 100, 200 folks who are there trying to innovate. I think this is what we need to be doing more of. So thank you for the opportunity. This is a fun discussion.
Excellent. And thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Hadas, Chris, Jenny, and Vasanth. You covered some important ground. Let's give them another round of applause. So, next on the agenda, we will now have a short coffee and ecosystem expo break, and return here for the first pitch block of the day at 11:05. Thank you.